New Buddha Way Dharma Talks. Geoff Hunt presents a talk on some aspect of the Buddha's teaching.
Morning, everyone. As you know, we're going to talk about Vipassana. I do remember my early days becoming interested in Buddhism over 20 years ago and feeling some confusion about all the different terms being used. It seems for every term being used, there were at least three other ways of putting whatever it was you're talking about. So it gets very confusing. The confusion is also added to by the fact that there are three major traditions in Buddhism. That is the Theravada, which is associated with Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, and so on. And then there's Mahayana, which is associated with China, Japan, South Korea, and so on. And then there's Vajrayana, which is associated with Tibet. Now, the basics are all the same for all three of them. But the problem is that they sometimes use different language, and not only that, they conceptualize things rather differently. But just so that you know where we stand, in New Buddha Way, we are adopting a Theravada approach to things. But I don't want you to think that they're completely different religions or whatever. They agree on all the basics, such as the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, and so on and so forth. But it is confusing when you see so many different terms. Well, one thing that has arisen recently, fairly recently, is that the idea that there are two separate and different types of meditation. This is actually a wrong idea. So according to this, one type of meditation is based on breathing, sometimes called calm meditation or shamatha. The idea is that you focus on your breathing or some other object for focusing the mind in such a way that the mind starts letting go of everything else, and the focus becomes brighter and brighter, and everything else becomes duller and duller. We've let go of a lot of things which are causing us unhappiness, so that the result is that the mind becomes calmer. So for this reason, karma, that is C-A-L-M-E-R, karma. So for this reason, we sometimes call it calm meditation. I do feel for you because it can be confusing. You could always look at the book I wrote if you want to get some clarification on it. But we do use more of the language and concepts of the Theravada rather than, for example, Zen. Zen, which I'm familiar with when I was in Japan, does use somewhat different vocabulary and also leaves out some important concepts for us in Theravada. Okay, so what I want to do today is only to say, look, these are the so-called two major meditation methods, and they're not really separate at all. They're just two dimensions of the same thing. That's all I want to try and say, just to try to avoid the confusion, although it might of course cause even more confusion, which is not my aim at all. Now, last Sunday, we had a talk on breathing, you remember, breathing meditation. Now, generally, not always, but generally, that belongs with the idea of calm meditation or tranquility meditation or shamatha, which is S-A-M, shamatha, T-H-A, shamatha. And that would be emphasized, for example, by Zen in Japan. But the idea has arisen that is one kind of meditation. Then there's another one, which is Vipassana. And that puts the focus on awareness of one's own mental states. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. Now, The position I've always taken is that these are two dimensions of the same thing. So there's not actually two different types of meditation at all. And if you read the Pali Canon closely, and you also listen to the best of the monastic leaders that we have, such as Bhikkhu Bodhi, Bhikkhu Thanissaro, etc., you will see for yourself that they also hold that there is no difference. Well, there is a difference between the two, but they're not separate. They're just two dimensions of the same thing which should work together. So, breathing. Okay, we've done a bit of that. Now, what is the difference between these two, Vipassana and Shamatha? That is between, let's use English, insight meditation and calm meditation. What's the difference, and do they work together? Okay. Now, even the word meditation is a little bit confusing because it is sometimes referred to as jhana. It's also, I think, more accurately referred to as bhavana. Bhavana meaning cultivation of something. So the word I would prefer to use for meditation would be bhavana, because it's not one single technique. It's a bunch of techniques which have to do with quietening the mind, focusing the mind then seeing more into the reality of things and becoming wiser, calmer, and ultimately always possible that it will have some sort of breakthrough into a different view of our reality. Okay, shamatha. Very quickly, that refers to a pacification of the mind by single-pointedness, focusing on one thing, e.g. the breath. But you could also take, say, a nice shiny pebble or a flower and just focus your mind on that as closely as you can. And the mind will start to become calmer. Because look, it makes good sense. If the mind is focused very closely on one thing, it will have to let go of the other things. In letting go of the other things, that is starting to calm down. So now you're just with the pebble or the flower or the bowl of water or whatever it is, or the breathing, right? Makes good sense. And it is a fundamental part of the Buddhist teaching on how to reach peace and compassion. Okay, now Vipassana. That is insight meditation. How does that connect with what I've just said about calm meditation? Vipassana, they don't really know the origins of the word Vipassana, but it means something like a special kind of seeing into something. Okay? So there's a shift in the emphasis. Now, instead of looking at one thing and sticking with the one thing, so we let go of everything else, we are going to look into our own mind, and by our mind we mean our emotional, conceptual responses to things. That is like setting up a special awareness that can look at what is going on in our own minds. Okay? So we call that Vipassana, we call it insight meditation, or we call it mindfulness. Now, a huge amount of confusion has been caused in the last decade or two by taking mindfulness out of its context and referring to it as though it were one miraculous method that the Buddhists happen to have. We can throw away the rest, we'll just stick on mindfulness. Now, this is not very wise at all. Mindfulness is not in itself a meditation technique. Well, it's a meditation technique, but it doesn't exist in it by itself. It's just one dimension, and I want to try to show you how these two dimensions fit together. Okay, so Vipassana, or let's call it insight meditation, involves awareness of and examination of your own states of mind. Now, were you doing that when you were focusing on your breathing? Well, in a sense, yes, but in a very narrow way, because you're just focusing on the one object. And you're not thinking about it, analyzing it, or anything else, not drawing any conclusions from it. You're just resting in the one object. But Vipassana is very different, because it's saying thinking is okay. Being aware of what the mind is doing is okay. You don't have to just stick on one, but you can do that as well, but not at the same time. But you could do that as well as part of grappling with how our mind works and how sometimes how it dysfunctions and causes us pain, happiness, and really bad decisions, anger, and so on. So let's use the English words. Calm meditation and mindfulness, or Vipassana, or insight meditation, are two dimensions of the same thing. So how do they work together? So Vipassana, you might say, involves this seeing into one's own arising mental activity. Could be a memory, could be a thought, could be a fear, could be an anger, could be something emotional, it could be something very intellectual, but it's everything that's swirling about in your mind there. Now, the Buddha says that if you really want to be wise and really understand things, go deeply, you do need to have some grip on that swirling about of all sorts of things in the mind, because we know it's there, because you've only got to sit for 5 minutes or 30 minutes like you just have. And I can be absolutely sure that since we're all human beings, that there was a lot of things swirling through your mind, probably disconnected and not controlled by you. Most of them probably harmless. Sometimes maybe some resentment or anger or something might just flicker by. You know that's going on. Now, generally, we just ignore it, or we let it upset us, drive us, give us bad decisions, and so on. So the breakthrough is to say, why don't we just get familiar with that whole mental turmoil that's going on all the time? Now, to do that, first of all, we do need some calm. So that's where the calm comes in. So we can start by doing a body scan, then watching the breathing. The mind is becoming calmer. When the mind becomes calmer and knows how to focus and stay in one place, then it can do insight meditation. So the calm becomes a preamble, an introduction to the insight meditation. See, this is the real breakthrough that the Buddha made. Everybody in his time who was, for example, they would call them yogis, doing meditation, they would focus only on the breathing meditation, only on calm meditation. They did not really think. The breakthrough that the Buddha made, and makes him remembered, is that he added something to this. That once the mind is calm and can focus on something, why don't we use that to look deeply into what is going on in our minds, and the trouble it causes, and the happiness it sometimes also brings about. So there are not two separate dimensions of bhavana. Bhavana, remember, is cultivation, is meditation. It's meditation as a whole, looking at it as a whole. Right. Now, if insight meditation, as the word suggests, is going to gain some insight into the working of the mind, how is it going to do that? And what is it going to discover? Now, if you are sitting doing breathing meditation, we could stick with that, and hopefully, if we hold on to the one object, everything else will fall away, and we might have some sort of enlightenment experience. That's quite possible, without ever doing any insight. But it doesn't generally work that way. The Buddha is saying, let's really, use all we've got here to develop our wisdom and our compassion. So what do you discover? Now, this is where insight meditation really gets a grip, because he says, well, first of all, you will find three major things. One which he calls the 3 marks of existence, or somebody called them the 3 marks of existence and then stuck a label on him. So what are the 3 marks of existence? One is the impermanence, the transience, the shakiness of all things, that nothing stands still. Now, you have to be able to do a certain amount of concentration, that is, get the mind settled, before one becomes aware of how it's very difficult. Well, it's impossible really to control what is coming up in the mind, but what you can do is be aware of what is coming up in the mind. Once you've mastered a certain level of calm meditation, then the mind is steady enough and penetrative enough to see what it is that is rising in the mind. And that is why it is called Vipassana, seeing into the mind. That is not what you were doing in calm meditation. You're looking at one thing and getting the mind to settle by looking at the one thing. Now we're doing something different. We have already settled the mind, and we already have some power of concentration, focusing on something. But now we have the power to see what it is that is arising in the mind, and in what way is that arising. That is a huge step for mankind, as the astronaut said. The old school and the yogis that the Buddha met and discussed with were focused only on calm meditation, that dimension. He went away, thought this isn't enough, and what he discovered is we call it now insight meditation. So one of the things that we noticed, looking at three general marks of existence, is the impermanence or processing of everything. Everything's in process all the time. Nothing stands still. Secondly, that we feel some dissatisfaction or bewilderment in all this turmoil and change going on all the time in our heads. So there is a form of dissatisfaction or a form of suffering. Suffering is the worst of it. It's not all suffering. Some of it is just things arising, maybe fairly neutral, maybe nice ideas. 1 second you've got a nice idea, 10 seconds later you've got a nasty one. And it's not as though you decided to do that. It's just rising up. So this kind of self-creation of the mind is interesting. We don't really have much control over it. So 3 marks of existence: impermanence, dissatisfaction, because every time we try to cling to something, it keeps moving. It keeps pulling away from you or pulling you in a different direction, the direction you don't want to go. I bet you there isn't a person here that hasn't experienced that. When you have some thought and you try to let it go, but it won't go. It's got its own dynamic. But at least we know this now, so we've got to get a little bit wiser about how we deal with this. The third mark of existence is Anata, which has been terribly misunderstood. In general, Anata just means that nothing has a permanent, fixed separateness or substance or essence in it, because everything's shifting. How could there be anything but non-selfishness, non-selfness? Funny word, isn't it? So the Buddha is saying, if you look into anything, it's changing, but it's also morphing into something else. And we don't seem to have any Now, why should we have any control of it when we think that you and I are actually part and parcel of the very same process? So it is not that I am sitting in some nice, solid, stable place and watching this going by. I too am changing. Now, this creates quite a bit of confusion, doesn't it? It's like I'm sitting in a boat, watching all the turmoil going on around me, and then I realize, just to top it all, I'm starting to feel seasick, and I'm moving about in the boat, trying to get it to go in another direction. So I am part and parcel. My whole body has been shifted about in the boat by the waves of the sea. So there's the waves from without, and there are waves within. The Buddha thinks, and you could argue with him, and please do argue with him, that this is not really, I don't really feel that. But he thinks that it is very human to feel this kind of bewilderment, is the word I usually use, unsteadiness, because it's not what I want. I want to cling to something. I want some ground under my feet. I want something to stay the same. How is anything going to stay the same when I myself am changing within an environment which is also changing? Now, wisdom would be saying, okay, that's how it is. The least I can do is get used to it and get to understand its ways and how it drifts this way and that way. Because even the waves on the ocean, they do actually move in currents. They can become aware of a particular current. Okay, so see, all of this doesn't belong in what we call calm meditation, because calm meditation, I see it as a kind of preliminary that we need to at least settle the mind enough to be able to be aware of and examine the thoughts, feelings, etc., that are coming up. So we need that steady instrument. I need to steady the boat, or maybe steady the oars, before I can start to go in a particular direction in my boat, or be realistic about what I can do and what I can't do. Trying to row against the tide is pretty difficult and pretty futile. Trying to row with the tide is much easier. But I've got to know which way the tide is going. How am I going to know unless I look into my own mind and see? Because what you will see is that there are thoughts which may put a smile on your face. You might not even know you're smiling. Somebody sitting next to you will say, what are you smiling about? It's some thought that's come up in your mind. Okay, hallelujah, great. What about the nasty, unpleasant thoughts or memories that come up and won't go away? Then your face might look quite different. Okay? Now, the unique revolution of the Buddha is to put us in a position to understand the workings of our own mind. Not in the way of psychology or neurology, but in a personal way, that it is your mind we are talking about, not somebody else's mind, or we're not talking about the brain. We're talking about the contents of your mind and the way things rise up. Okay? So there's a kind of shakiness or sadness or instability about human life. We all feel it. It's there. That is how it is. Isn't it a little wiser to get to understand that and work with it? Much better. Because now when you're rowing the boat against the tide, you're a little bit wiser about how to do that. Or if you can maneuver the boat so that you're working with the tide, that'll be even better. Okay? So this is insight meditation. In insight meditation, it's okay to stop and think. You know, we are told all the time, don't think about it. Well, yes and no. It depends what you are doing at the time. If a thought is a source of unhappiness, well then why not let it go? Why not stop thinking about it? On the other hand, if you're just noticing something about the way that your mind works, why not think about it? Why not be aware of it and recognize it when it comes up next time? So the Buddha is not against thinking. We sometimes hear this, but it usually comes from Zen people in Mahayana who put too much emphasis on the calm side of the meditation. Okay, so this is how it is. This is how it is. We practice bhavana, which is a cultivation of wisdom. We've got some ways of doing this. And there are two dimensions to it. One dimension says, first of all, focus the mind on one place, try to stay with it, e.g. the breathing, and your mind will settle down, and after maybe 10, could be 20, could be 30 minutes, whatever, you will start to feel calmer. Now, there are two benefits. One is that you're strengthening the ability of the mind to stay in one place, because you need to stay in one place when you're going to examine something that's popping up and you want to know what it is it friend or foe or whatever, or not to be judged at all. That's important. It's just there. This is how human life is. Right. So we need to do just one dimension, just to settle the mind, learn to focus the mind. Now, we don't stop there. The yogis that the Buddha met, like Ramaputta, Uddaka, and so on, they only went that far. They didn't know about insight meditation at that time. That was his unique contribution to human culture. Okay, so we've settled the mind. It's now focused. Now, as we go on, sitting there, now our mind is calm. Now we're able to get a handle on things because it's calmer. Also, we've strengthened our ability to focus. So now we can really be aware of what that was arising then and made me give a sigh. Why do we sigh? When we go, it's because we just thought of something, probably. Something that we don't really want to accept. But there it is. So, much greater teachers than myself have explained this. For example, Thanisaro Bhikkhu, he said this. Two important things, actually. First of all, he points out that in the Sutta Pitaka, that is the collection of the Buddhist teachings, Vipassana is hardly mentioned at all as a separate thing. He goes on to say, shamatha, right, that's the calm meditation, jhana, which is how the mind cools off, and vipassana, that's insight, are all part of a single path. That's what he says. They're all part of a single path. They're not, join the club. Either you're in the insight club or you're in the calm club or whatever. This is nonsense. What we've done in Buddhism, sadly, is to cause a lot more confusion, I think. There is one way. There is one path. We've now got people, in Mahayana saying there is no path, that the real path is not a path, etc., which is very clever, and in a way it's right, but it doesn't help us. We just need to be able to have some simple instructions and follow them. Following them is up to you. Nobody can drag a horse to drink. Okay. So it may interest you to know that there was a period when Vipassana fell away from the teaching and bhavana entirely, almost for 800 years. The only thing going was calm meditation. But then somebody called Mahasi Sayadaw in Myanmar in the 18th century, that is 800 years later, rediscovered it and put it all together again. But it's taking a long time for us to realize that we are just dealing with one thing here, and that is the human clinging to what is bound to be unstable. Cling to what is unstable and you will be unstable. Distance yourself. Don't judge. Don't say, I don't like that, or that's horrible. That's how it is. Okay, so that's maturity. That's wisdom, to accept what must be. For example, the loss of someone you love. It's a terrible thing to encounter. It's a terrible, miserable thing to encounter. And yet another part of us says, well, what do I expect? Show me the person that has lived forever. Where is such a person? No, that's not how it is. I'm a grown up now. I accept the way things they are, and they must be that way. Okay, I'm going to stop there. And well, I think I can stay for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then I need to go to speak at another conference. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand you back to Lynn.
New Buddha Way lets go of East and West and starts afresh in the life we have now. For more information, visit www.newbuddhaway.org.